Hi there, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kelly Barner. I'm the head of content and operations here at Art of Procurement, and I'm going to be your facilitator and sometimes participant for the next half an hour or so. So before I bring my guests up on stage with me, just a few quick housekeeping things. If this is your first Art of Procurement webinar, first of all, thank you for joining us. You will notice one key thing is missing, and that would be slides. So we are going to have a completely live conversation today. We have a few things planned out that we know we want to get to discuss, but I will be keeping my eye on the chat up the right-hand side of your screen throughout today's conversation. Rather than saving everything to the end, if I see interesting comments and questions come in as we go through the conversation, I will actually pull those in as we go, giving you an opportunity to be part of what we discuss today. So then to our topic. So today we're going to focus on optimizing services spend management for maximum impact, really talking about the opportunity that these categories of spend represent at every single stage of procurement maturity. We're going to talk about value creation ownership as well as long-term expectations on the part of the business, looking from table stakes management of services to mature business impact that gets into a lot of different value categories. Without further ado, let me bring all three of my guests up on stage today. I'm very glad to be joined by Cheri Vander Moren, Lead Indirect Sourcing Manager at Amway, Mark Sawicki, Senior Vice President at Guidant Global, and Ben De Wulf, Client Solutions Architect, also at Guidant Global. So Mark, Ben, and Cheri, thank you so much all for being here with us today.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Excellent. Now, as we get started, we always like to start here. This is our Art of Procurement tradition. And Cheri, I'll actually start with you. Did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
I love this question. So I've always been interested in procurement. My dad was actually a procurement executive for years in his career.
Second generation procurement. This is very
exciting.
Exciting.
But it took me about 20 years in my career to finally take a turn in procurement. I've had a number of jobs at my company over the last 15 years. I've been a program manager, a project manager, a strategist. And my mentor about 5 years ago was the VP of procurement, and I was looking to expand my skill set. And she said, you would be great in indirect procurement. And so here I am 5 years later. I love it. It's a great fit for me. And so I'd say it found me, but I also sought it out over a long time.
Well, good for you. That's just a sign of your excellent judgment. We're going to hear a lot of that today. Ben, same question to you. How did you find your way into procurement?
Yeah, good question. So I have to say it found me. So I worked in, I guess, the outsourcing space, MSP space for 15 years, 16 years. I've had many roles, and then I guess over the last sort of 7 or 8 years, I've been working more on the sales side of things, working to support our customers with their MSP or service procurement requirements. So that's very much meant engaging with procurement during the tendering processes, understanding what their wants and needs are, and ultimately how we need to service them through our solution.
Excellent. And Mark, last but not least, did you find procurement or did procurement find you?
Yeah, procurement definitely found me. I was lucky enough to spend, probably the first 10 years or so of my career in consulting environments, and then worked in some organizations where I moved around in finance and sales and marketing, and ended up in supply chain and operations, back in probably 2007, 2008, and fast forward 17, 18 years, whatever that is now. And I continue to operate in the same space and just absolutely love it.
Awesome. And one of the things that we'll talk about today, not only is finding your way to procurement, sort of a niche professional journey, but finding your way to services spend within the larger world of procurement is even a little bit more unique. Before we totally dig in, Cheri, I actually want to give you an opportunity to introduce your company. Can you talk a little bit about Amway, just for anybody who's not familiar with what the company does? Because that's going to be something we talk about a lot as we go through today's conversation.
Absolutely. So Amway is the world's largest direct sale organization, and we have been in operation for over 65 years. We operate globally and have over 1 million Amway business owners who are building their own small business for themselves, but not by themselves. And so we manufacture a variety of products, many that are made here in the USA, in Michigan, where we're headquartered, and go from nutrition to home and beauty and home healthy living products. And so it's a great business to work for, and we make an impact for people's lives all over the world.
Excellent. As we go from that sort of into our main topic, how would you characterize your current services spend management program at Amway?
Yeah. So our company has had an indirect sourcing department for years and years. But around 2017, 2018, they formalized the services spend program by consolidating it with a VMS, with a MSP. And at that point in time, it really helped us gain better visualization and clarity to our services spend, just to support the sourcing managers and the hiring managers in those decisions. And I just see throughout the entire program these concepts that are not new to lean thinking around visual management, which is just this concept around making work visible, making problems visible, and solving problems. And so by just putting a formal program in place and making our services spend visible, we can identify what is the standard of work we're looking for, where are we deviating, what type of controls or decisions do we want to put in place for our services spend. And really having a formalized program has helped us accomplish so many things that we would have struggled to do if we didn't actually have a formal program in place.
And I do think that formality helps, but can be hard to get to with services. I think a lot of procurement teams can find it intimidating. And Mark, we know we have a lot of different maturity levels of organizations with us today. So as much as in procurement, we love our own terminology and we love our TLAs, or 3-letter acronyms. I actually think it might be helpful right up front to run quickly through some of the different types of services spend, because there are a few different sort of pockets that most corporations have. And as we dig in, I think it's helpful to understand the differences between them. So if I can put you on the spot and have you take us through that, I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think part and parcel to so many organizations figuring it out is defining those things internally first and foremost, right? Every organization has its own nuance. Every organization has their own TLAs, and when I think about that from a more macro perspective, and as we're having conversations with organizations that we're partnering with, to me, in its very simplest form, I think about it as non-employee labor overall, right? Any time an organization is entering into an agreement with a temporary worker, with a freelancer, with an IC, with a consultant, with a BPO agency, with consultants overall, each of those things tend to have its own level of intricacy. Each of those things certainly bring with them some level of risk to the organization, and ultimately, back to the point I was making from the outset, back to the thinking about how organizations can bring that right governance and that right compliance, ensuring that the right competitive pricing is being brought to bear, and the quality standards that are being met. I think at the end of the day, those are the things that are most important. And so we can kind of call it whatever the heck we want to call it, but it's really just thinking about that non-employee labor overall and how to bring that right process and control, which Cheri and Amway have just done a magnificent job of over these last number of years.
Excellent. Now, Ben, when we talk about non-employee labor, right, I think one of the highest level divisions might be SOW-based work, right? And then everything else might be, again, using general terminology, contingent workforce, right? Companies have different descriptions for it. If we focus on SOW-based services for a minute, what is it important for procurement to remember about the larger business impact that might be associated with that type of service?
So I guess we have to go back to why their business uses services procurement as a way to get skills and resources into the organization. Like typically they need to get them in quickly. They need minimal barriers in place. It's all about getting the work done, and fundamentally, it's making sure that nothing's restrictive.
Yeah.
So when we look at procurement's job within this would be to obviously bring those skills in quickly, put a mechanism in place, put some controls in place, and put some it's just so you've got reporting off the back end of that. Those controls and those restrictions can sometimes conflict with what the users are trying to get out of the service. So the moment we put that rigor in place, we need to have careful consideration about what the impact is on the business, because if we need the users to use the process and to get user adoption, to get buy-in, if it becomes a prohibitor and it's not an enabler, then all of a sudden I think you can get challenges with people wanting to use the service. It's going to get pushed back. And actually, I think wrongly so. I think procurement will be seen as the police in this situation, where actually all they're trying to do is fundamentally de-risk it for their organization whilst putting the controls of visibility in, which obviously then results into cost savings, etc.
And I think that idea of de-risking is important, because as much as SOW-based services give us an opportunity to have business impact, if they're not managed well, we may have business impact, right? And while we all want impact, we don't want impact. What are some of the forms of risk, Ben, that could pop up if procurement is either, like you said, putting themselves sort of obstructively between the business and the service delivery in a way that's not helpful, or perhaps there's just straightforward oversight that's missing? What forms of risk tend to come through?
Well, I guess fundamentally, if the service doesn't work for the business, they won't use it. So ultimately, they're still going to procure services, down the path that they already have done in the first place. So I guess the challenge for procurement in that instance is, when they're not able to get visibility of it, they can't begin to impact that opportunity. They can't begin to make strategic decisions about how they can evolve it. But I think when you look at the fact that the business aren't going through this compliant process, then you're opening yourself up to the risks that currently exist today if you don't have a well-managed services procurement program, which sits around, do the projects deliver on what they need to do? Do they deliver on time? Is there a cost implication involved in this because it hasn't done what it should have done? So now there's some projects creep that's involved in it, so then I have to rescope it and it costs a little bit more money. Maybe there's the legal challenges of it. So who's drafting these statement of works in the first place? Is it your business? Is it the suppliers that are drafting it? How have they been constructed? Yeah. Are you in a position whereby it's very clear in terms of what the supplier's role and responsibility is to be able to deliver that? What happens in the event that it's not been structured well, they don't deliver it. There's issues around who's going to pay what. Maybe actually you're not able to enforce some of the laws and clauses that are within the statement of work because, they're more favourable to the suppliers. I think there's quite a few impacts at play here if we're not able to effectively mobilise a service procurement program to some degree.
Yeah. And I like the fact that right from the outset, we've sort of focused this discussion around overall business impact, right? This isn't just about procurement. It's not just about spend. It's not just about providers. It's the business overall. And Cheri, I think that gives us an opportunity to learn a little bit more about your program, starting with the people that you're working with on a regular basis to manage, to select, to oversee these services. Who would you say are your primary decision makers and stakeholders around services spend?
Oh, absolutely. So our hiring managers in each functional area are definitely key decision makers. Our business lets them have a very strong voice in what suppliers we go with. They own the budget and they can make those decisions for their functional area. But certainly other key stakeholders include our support functions of HR, finance, legal, and procurement. And so as we think about the priorities of each area, we do weigh all those things together. And by having a managed program and having a cross-functional governance team ensures that the voices of each of those stakeholder groups are heard, and that we are well balanced in how we're making decisions and how we're guiding hiring managers through that process.
Based on those conversations that you have with hiring managers, what would you say are some of the most common forms of how they define success?
Well, our hiring managers obviously want things fast. They want as little, roadblocks as possible. Cost is also a very important, factor in this. And then compliance. And these are all priorities that are important to Amway. And so our program reflects the company's priorities by, again, having visibility and management over our services. If priorities shift in the company, we can more rapidly shift how we're applying those new priorities to our program. And so if cost becomes a greater priority for a certain year or in a certain segment, we can pull that lever because we have that funnel where all of our services spend is going through. And it's a very, close partnership between our sourcing managers, our MSPs, and our stakeholder groups. So it's very, very closely tied together.
And clearly, Mark, Cheri, and the team at Amway have that close relationship between what SOW-based services can do and the overall priorities of the organization, even as they potentially shift. How common do you find that is, where procurement is able to understand that through these services, there needs to be sort of a wide business lens, looked at value, looked at time, looked at process and ease of acquiring these services, versus sort of slipping into that mistake of forgetting that the rest of the business is outside of procurement and it really does need the value that these services offer?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question and really varies quite a bit across the board. But thinking about that question, I was lucky enough to facilitate a session at a conference probably about a year or so ago I was probably about 60 or so procurement leaders. And one of the questions that I asked that group was a raise of hands on how many of those individuals felt they had a really good grip of what was happening within their organization across the board, right? That whole business question that you just asked. And I was astonished to see only about maybe 30% of the individuals in that room raise their hand. And I think when you think about those best-in-class programs and those best-in-class procurement organizations, those are certainly the ones that are taking a whole business approach, right? They're thinking about it as collectively as possible. They're being collaborative. When you think about so many of the conversations around CPOs having a quote unquote seat at the table, those are the organizations that are doing that. That said, you think about procurement organizations and you think about programs like this, and you got to start somewhere, right? And so when we think about setting that foundation, beginning the approach, starting with an individual segment, starting where procurement has some significant influence, can act as a great way to start to build that engagement, start to build that advocacy, start to build some results, and then really use that as a springboard to take it to other departments, functional areas, geographies, et cetera, and just start to bring more and more of that spend in and more of that utilization in over time, so that over 2, 3, 4 years, and it can truly take that long sometimes, to get that whole business approach and really start optimizing your buy in a more overarching way, I guess I'll say.
Yeah. And you do have to start somewhere, right? So it's interesting. We kind of started with how does procurement understand these services in terms of their impact on the business? Then there's those stakeholders and decision makers. Then there's company-wide impact. But Ben, we also have to keep in mind what's going on in the larger market. So when we think about potentially having insight into market intel or having some sort of advice around specific service level negotiation strategies, how might access to those external perspectives help procurement achieve all of these internal goals?
Yeah, I guess fundamentally we need to understand what the marketplace is doing. So that could be the marketplace in terms of the supply chain, so supply chain vendors and partners that we're having to utilize on our program. I guess the other side of it could be against competitor analysis. So when we're operating in an industry, in a buoyant industry where there are lots of competitors on there, we need to make sure that we understand what their growth trajectory is, how they're doing in the market, and then that then at least makes you understand, what do you need to be aware of when you're making services procurement decisions. I think some of that also overlays onto the supply chain. So there will be some suppliers in there that maybe they afford an element of risk to them. So maybe we need to be aware of it. And obviously there'll be other suppliers in there which they may be slightly more expensive. So I guess it's just you need to understand the lay of the land in order for you to make those, I guess, strategic informed decisions, and the impact of, utilizing, in this example of, specific suppliers into the program, if they are suppliers that are perhaps not so compliant as an example, what are the program impacts from that?
Do you tend to see either a connection or even a correlation, Ben, between procurement's own level of maturity and then the different types of information and strategies they're able to bring to bear on services spend?
I think so I think in my opinion, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect out there in terms of what procurement want to be able to achieve quickly for a services procurement program versus actually what's realistic. So if we think about, so when I speak to customers, normally it's around control, visibility, actually, what are you going to save me? Like, why should I pay for that level of service? And it doesn't seem to be a greater focus on actually what's in it for the users of the business. So, when we think about embedding a program in with a customer, it's really important that we get the user adoption in there and the change management's right. And actually what we can achieve from day one actually will change greatly over time as the program matures. But if we try to retrieve it too quickly, actually, I feel like we just set ourselves up to fail. Maybe there's a bit too much control in there. Maybe taking it back a step. What does that landscape look like? It's complex. Like if you're a multinational organization, your procurement activity is going to vary, dependent on your country story that you're located in and the service that you procurement in those countries, and actually each country's maturity level on this service procurement journey. So it's really difficult to kind of understand actually what that all looks like, and then I guess build that day one program around that versus what it needs to be over a period of time.
I think that's a really interesting, especially when you start to talk about the disconnect that sometimes exists. At Art of Procurement, we've been talking a lot about operating models for a while, especially as, things like AI are coming in, or as priorities shift, or as team sizes shift, talent mixes shift. Mark, can I also get your perspective on this idea of general procurement maturity, whether or not they have sort of a deep bench specifically around services, and maybe how that tends to impact their approach to getting maximum value and benefit out of those services?
Yeah, the maturity absolutely plays a key piece in it, but I think, and it's building on exactly what you're highlighting, Kelly, in that I think that given the tools, given the technology, given the data and visibility that we have access to on a go forward basis, it really allows us to do so much more quickly than we've ever been able to do before. And so, you think about, I'll call it that change management process, and really trying to build a sound practice and education and engagement and activation along the way. And the reality of it is you can get some really, really quick wins by doing some really, really simple things, utilizing the tools, technology, the data that we have. And so while a more mature procurement department or a more mature organization is undoubtedly going to be a little bit more adept at that, just given where they are from an evolutionary perspective, I'd say that there's nothing that would preclude a more a procurement department a little bit more in its infancy from a maturity perspective to achieve some of those same things. And I'll go back to the point that I was making earlier, in that you go ahead and you identify that specific buy, that specific department, and you focus in on that and get some of those wins. Right, when you do that well, those kinds of stories are going to spread like wildfire in an organization, and they're going to help drive additional advocacy and engagement and adoption along the way.
And part of what comes into play here is that even if we just talk about SOW-based services, there are a lot of different types of work that can be lumped into that. So it's definitely not a monolith. I mean, even from my own experience, you could have everything from, Big Four consulting through someone providing a facility service at a customer-facing location. And you're not necessarily going to manage all of those things the same. You're not going to get the same level of the same type of value out of those. Cheri, to the extent that you can share this, what are some of the types of services managed through Amway's SOW-based services program?
That's a great question. About 50% of our services are technology based. And so outsource, full BPO for our customer support desk. Others are project driven SOWs where we're outsourcing development teams for a specific deliverable. So that's about 50% of our spend. And then the rest is made up of marketing services, creative agencies, financial services, HR, certainly consulting services, R&D support services. So it's a really wide variety across our entire program.
Do you find that there are any general best practices that really help when dealing? I mean, that is a really broad range of service types that you've talked about, but are there any things that generally apply across that in terms of making those projects and the following services successful?
Yeah, our MSP team works very closely with our sourcing managers in each category, and we have been careful to not require a firm, rigid approach, category by category, but really allow for flexibility, because while each category is using similar tools such as rate cards or supplier segmentation, how those tools come into play and how how that they're applied for each category looks quite different. And so our MSP team kind of partners with each category manager to determine what does this look like for their category, and really takes the lead from the category manager. And that's been very successful for us to allow for that type of flexibility. And each functional area also has a different level of executive engagement and executive priorities of what they are trying to achieve with their supply base. And so just allowing for that flexibility has really helped us achieve value in each category instead of just trying to drive towards the same exact value creation across the program.
Yeah. And clearly rigidity in this area would be incredibly difficult, right? And yet, because we're talking across this continuum, not just of services, but of procurement maturity levels, I wonder, Mark, and fair warning for anybody who's just listening, I'm going to use air quotes, okay? So how often procurement teams are trying to jam services through a, air quotes, typical strategic sourcing process that was designed for packaging or a product or material-based category that could lose some opportunities because services are different.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it's a build off of what Cheri was just highlighting. I think one of the things that we found success in, both in the Amway program and with many other clients that we're servicing, is by customizing that approach. Right, we absolutely have a best practice and a recommended approach when it comes to purchasing overall. But we're going to go ahead and incorporate that individual organization nuance, that individual department nuance, to really kind of ferret out what some of those modifications need to be, so that we can ensure that we're meeting the specific needs of that individual buying manager, that engagement manager, as well as that specific buy. Right. I'll go back to the example that you were just highlighting, or some of the examples you were highlighting, Kelly, in terms of thinking about a big four consulting buy versus an individual marketing program buy, that you're talking maybe $50,000 versus $5 million, and each of those things is going to need to be handled very, very differently, and is going to require a different level of internal client expertise in order to support it, right? And so we, as the MSP working with Amway, we can go ahead and facilitate that $50,000 buy. I don't want to say completely on our own, but with a little bit more limited support and engagement from Cheri's marketing managers, category managers, buyers, et cetera. But when we start talking about those bigger consulting engagements, like, it really needs to be a partnership, and we need to be really working together well in order to make sure that the right set of requirements is being defined, the right outcomes are being incorporated into those agreements, ensuring that SLAs and KPIs and all those things that come along with just developing a good contract are in place, and really making sure that we're working closely with our clients and with the managers at Amway is one of the ways that we can help bring that best practice and then turn it into, I'll go back to your earlier question again, that whole business approach in terms of managing all of that outsourced services, non-employee labor spend. It's going to make it a whole lot easier when we're able to achieve those things in that type of way.
Yeah. And I think too, capturing the impact, right? And especially because we talked about big consulting, but once you say marketing, Ben, the number one rule of talking about anything related to marketing is don't say the word savings, because if you do, you see the eye glaze. That conversation is over. And of course, cost and savings is one form of value, but there are a lot of other forms of overall business impact we can have through these services. How should procurement both capture and then also communicate the larger impact of well-managed SOW-based services?
Yeah, so I think this really comes back to that business case for change, right? So we know we need to optimize our services procurement program, and part of that is going to be cost saving, cost reduction. You know, we're outsourcing A over to B. I understand that, but then I guess the bits that kind of sit behind that, those kind of softer savings. So actually, have we optimized the process for the business? So is it easier for them now to engage with the service? Are they no longer accountable for specific parts of the process? That means they can add more value into the bits that they are responsible for because they've got more time to be able to do that. Actually, maybe we're looking at it from they've only ever dealt with one or two suppliers in this marketing sector. Well, actually, when we looked at other areas of the business, they're engaging with these suppliers, other suppliers over there. So actually now we're giving them greater access to more suppliers, which, might mean they get things at a cheaper price. We don't need to tell them that, but fundamentally they've got it at a cheaper price in a quicker time. So I think the key is, understand what your business needs, pains, challenges, and desires to change are, document them, and then we just need to make sure that we're continuously reporting those back into the business. That could be, it could be maybe a series of workshops. Maybe there's an intranet page that we have up there demonstrating the benefits of it. Maybe there's a quarterly business review pack that we push out to the business so they're able to see all of the great things that we're being able to achieve. And actually some of the value of that is it could be specific benefits that we're able to deliver certain areas of the business that other parts of the area aren't aware of. So they go, oh, okay, that looks great. Let me talk to you a little bit about that because I need to find actually how I could benefit from that.
Yeah, Kelly, I'll jump in here too. It's something that we found really helpful is just laying out the value proposition of our program. And when we train hiring managers or walk through just the overview of our process for our program, we have in our communication decks a really clear layout of that value proposition and what those hiring managers can expect to receive for services running through the program. And that includes things like rate card compliance to rate cards that have been pre-negotiated by the sourcing team. It includes legal review, ensuring that our vendor risk process is being triggered when appropriate. We're taking all these things and expectations off the plate of our hiring managers and saying, hey, we will be that pair of eyes to ensure that all of the right checkboxes and, triggering different reviews and requirements that they're on the hook for, that they are triggered appropriately. And so it really helps them feel confident that they are following the company's requirements, that they are in compliance, that they're achieving the best, cost savings for whatever they're purchasing. And if we can do that in an efficient manner, and so it doesn't feel burdensome to them, that's a huge story that they will pass on to their peers when they have that great experience.
And I think what I hear you saying, Cheri, and this is actually an excellent point maybe to finish with, especially when you're focused on somebody who's looking at services, looking at the value they can drive. In that moment, procurement needs to provide an exceptional service of their own. You're not just saying, we're going to make sure you do it right, or we're going to make sure you do it the way we want you to do it. To your point, you're saying, no, we're going to help you achieve the following range of things. That is a service provider mindset, at least from my hearing. And I have to think that message must be received incredibly well from people that have a lot of other things they need to do. And as we've talked about, want to get the value and the benefit and the impact of those services as quickly as humanly possible.
Yeah, it really helps our detractors become advocates for the program. And we've seen that time and time again when, their feedback is heard and welcomed, and we're on a continuous, improvement journey in our program. And we make sure our stakeholders know that.
Yeah. Well, if you can turn detractors into advocates, you have definitely got something figured out. This was a super interesting conversation. I can't believe how quickly the time went by. But Cheri, Mark, and Ben, thank you so much to the three of you for being here to share your expertise and your advice with the audience.
Our pleasure, Kelly. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you as well to everybody who was with us here live or maybe is watching or listening in later on demand. We're so glad that you could be here. We hope you learned something, maybe that even made you think a little bit differently about the way you manage these services. And we welcome you to reach out and connect, and of course, to join us for future Art of Procurement events. Thank you so much, everybody.